Cartier-Bresson, Alex Webb, Elliot Irwitt, Robert Capa, Martin Parr. Those are just a small handful of the photographers that have been members of Magnum Photos, maybe the most respected, famous, and looked up to photographers in the world. If you're not familiar with Magnum, they're an international photographic cooperative, whatever that means, and they were founded by some pretty decent photographers, including Robert Capa, David Seymour, Maria Eisner, and Henri Cartier-Bresson. But is Magnum just an old boys club? In the iPhone era, is there still a place for serious photographers to follow in the footsteps of Capa or Webb or Salgado? How do we get from where we are in our journey as photographers to where they are? And is it even possible anymore? Well, the reality is that while we look up to Magnum photographers as artists a lot of the time, they were able to do that art largely because they had the work funded by the press photography they were doing full-time as their job. Don't forget, Magnum was and is a photojournalism agency. There are still some amazing press photographers working today, but the fact is, it's not really the same world in the digital era. Okay, so if that's the case, how can we go from where we are now to being in the same league as the photographers in Magnum? What are they doing that we're not? And sure, luck is a factor, but it's not all it takes. So what do? I reckon there's 3 key areas that we can focus on. You see, the photojournalism background of the greats is the first big clue here. Press photos, by their very nature, are first and foremost a way to communicate what's going on, and they only need to be pretty or artistic as a second priority. This is maybe a controversial take, but in my opinion, making a photo look good and pretty is the easy part. You can pretty quickly learn some basic art theory and composition from a few textbooks or YouTube videos and start taking photos that are aesthetically pleasing. But taking a photo that effectively tells a story is much, much harder. Why? See, when you're taking photos that tell a story, there's more going on than you might think. First, you have to figure out what the story actually is, so hold on to that. Then you have to tell that story by pointing your camera at something, and then you have to use your artistic and aesthetic tools not just to make the photo look pretty and artsy, but to make it look good in a way that further tells the story. Doing all of this is quite tricky and takes a lot of practice, but when you have to do it in the blink of an eye or a shutter, and you have to do it repeatedly over and over for a whole series of images, you can start to wonder how it's possible at all. The second big thing that the monster photographers from the Magnum the Magnum photographers do, packaging. And I don't mean that they all work in the envelope factory. What I mean is that they shoot projects. Obviously, this is a lot easier to plan for when you're on assignment. But if you're shooting personal work, it can get a little bit all over the place. So a lot of us tend to reset to our default settings and just kind of take photos of whatever. You know, we do a bit of street, protest here and there, maybe a few nightclub photos, and before you know it, your Lightroom catalog is a bit of a genre smoothie. And yeah, you can absolutely still shoot all of that stuff, but I think sitting down for an afternoon to figure out some self-assigned projects is a surefire way to really up your game for a couple of reasons. One is that if you have the project idea in the back of your brain while you're shooting, you'll naturally gravitate towards shots that fit into that project one way or another without really thinking about it. But maybe more importantly, projects can be finished. And when you have a finished project, it's not just here's my photography work, it's here's a photo project on X. Wrapping up your work into a nice digestible package makes it so much more accessible for people to actually consume the art you're making. I mean, if you don't have a theme, is it a photo book or is it just your photo album? And this is especially important if you want non-photo nerds to look at your work too. It goes from saying, do you want to look at some photos I just took, to here's a photo essay on nightclub culture in the Channel Islands, for example. Sharing one photo or a selection of pick and mix kind of photos is one thing, but having a cohesive collection that you can share, for example, on the Discord that you should be in, it doesn't just solidify your ability to take a good photo, it solidifies your ability to tell a story with several photos to immerse the viewer and to make them feel something. And I think making people feel stuff is kind of a key attribute of what makes art art. One other thing that you can do to up your game is to check out shop.huntercreatesthings.com. There's a link in the description where you can pick up some prints or a shirt and support what I do. It would mean the world to me. Please do check it out. And the final and maybe most uncomfortable and least fun thing that the Magnum photographers do that maybe we don't, they keep going, but not how you might expect. For one, most of them have been shooting non-stop for several decades. Decades, plural. And when you go all in and really commit to the bit of being a photographer long term, it does change your approach and it changes the way that you're thinking about the work that you're creating in a longer timeline. Being okay with it taking time and being along for the ride is one thing, and it's important. Becoming a great photographer is not as simple as figuring out how to use manual mode and taking a couple of Instagram bangers. Being a great photographer takes a decade at least, but that's going for longer. And another and maybe more important way that Magnum photographers keep going is that they keep going deeper. When Magnum photographers are doing a project or exploring a new idea or documenting something happening, they never stay surface level for very long at all. Magnum photographers deeply embed themselves into the events that they're covering, the stories that they're telling, and the groups that they're learning about. Think about less like being press that happened to be there that day, and more like Hunter S. Thompson along for the ride with Hell's Angels. And yeah, I am actually named after him. When you're closer to the story and you know the subject of your photos more deeply and you spend a longer time building up your work around them, it's pretty hard to imagine not being a much more successful and impactful photographer and documentarian. For example, if you look at Martin Parr's work on the English seaside, sure, some of it is just funny and street-esque, but more importantly than that, I think it captures so vividly that feeling of being a child on holiday on the English seaside. It transports you back to being a kid in the sun in a place that's familiar, but not home. I've never been a kid on holiday on the English seaside, but looking at Parr's work, I can feel what it might have been like. But even more than that, looking at his work, you can see that Martin Parr told us this story through his own eyes. Maybe his own unique experiences as a kid on holiday himself. You don't just get the story of a kid on holiday on the English coast, you get the story of Martin Parr on holiday in the English coast with his own personal feelings and views that he associates with those experiences. Focusing on telling visual stories with a specific goal or theme as closely as possible over a long period of time for decades and decades sounds hard. That's because it kind of is. I guess that's part of what makes Magnum photographers so special for us and why they're such a big influence on photography today. Or, you know, it could just be that the guys in Magnum use Leicas, stay hydrated, and create art. Remember a couple of videos ago or last video when I said that I learned how to ride a bike? Turns out I'm not that good yet, which is why you missed me last week because I busted my ankle. I'm fine, just letting you know, wear a helmet, etc. Thanks for watching.